It was here on Banna Strand on Good Friday morning, April 21st, 1916, that Sir Roger Casement, along with his two companions, Robert Monteith and Daniel Julian Bailey, rowed ashore from the German submarine U-19. They were attempting to rendezvous with the German vessel the Aud, which was waiting in Tralee Bay with guns and ammunition for the rising. As we know, their attempts failed, but the legacy of Sir Roger Casement still lives on in these parts 100 years later.
Casement's plan was to have 3 shiploads of arms, 100,000 rifles, machine guns, mortars, and most important, he was to bring personnel, trained personnel, army officers, to train the volunteers here for the rising.
The Aud was expected any time between Holy Thursday and Easter Sunday. That was the plan. But what the Military Council thought the plan was, they thought the plan was that the arms shipment would not arrive any earlier than Easter Sunday, or preferably in the early hours of Easter Monday morning. And when it was discovered quite late on in the day that the Germans and Devoy had a totally different view of this. The Military Council only discovered after the Aud and the U-boat had left that the dates were completely mixed up. So things went wrong from the word go. So you had the Devoy and the Germans thinking, okay, we're going to rendezvous between Holy Thursday and Easter Sunday, which actually was probably a better plan because, you know, the times and weather and all the rest of it, it's hard to expect, you know, a ship is going to arrive at 9:30 on a particular night. So you had that on the one side, and then the Military Council saying, no, God, no, stall the ball. We want the arms to come in on Easter Sunday night. So Austin Stack was then told that the arms were going to arrive no earlier than Easter Sunday night. So Austin Stack, being the member of the IRB locally, he was told to expect them Easter Sunday night. He told the pilot out in the Maharees that, you know, you're to expect this shipment of arms Easter Sunday night. So when the Aud came in to Tralee Bay on Holy Thursday, and Myrt O'Leary, who was the pilot, saw the ship flashing her light in that, he thought, well, it was a decoy vessel because he was given to expect another vessel on, and a smaller vessel at that. So he sees this ship coming in that's bigger than he was told to expect a few days earlier, and so he naturally thought, oh, that's a British Navy vessel, and he didn't do anything about it.
Early that morning, Saturday morning, the HMS Bluebell, a coastal ship, spotted the Aud and rendezvoused with the Aud, and finally brought the Aud on escort into Cove. And we know that Carol Spindler, the captain of the Aud, scuttled the Aud at entrance to Cove, and down went the ammunition.
The 21st of April 1916, the German submarine, the U-19, came in roughly halfway between Kerryhead on my left and the Muckluck Rock over my shoulder, up 3 or 4 miles out from the shore. But having failed to see and get any signal from the pilot boat from the Maharees, being a shrewd German, he wasn't prepared to hang around any longer. He was very conscious of the fact that he was in British territorial waters and it was the height of the First World War. He was afraid that the thumping of his engines would be heard by the officers in Glenderry Coast Guard Station on my left. So he put the 3 men, Roger Casement, Robert Monteith and Daniel Bailey, into the small boat and told them to make their way to the shore. The sea was rough, the morning was dark, and they had little experience of using a rowboat.
So they tried to bring the boat in up on the sand, but they couldn't. And then Monteith tried to capsize the boat, but he couldn't. And so the boat was left bobbing in the water. The men, meanwhile, got whatever stuff they needed out of it, and they buried some of the gear in the sand. When Casement, Monteith and Bailey, when they'd been making their way from the Strand over to the fort, they had to pass a farm, which is Allman's farm, and this would have been about 5 o'clock in the morning. So the first person up in the farmhouse was the farm servant, Mary Gorman. She happened to see these 3 men passing the farmyard. Later that morning, one of the labourers from the farm was up in the village, and there was obviously, the word had gotten out that something strange had washed up on the shore, that there was a boat, that there might be Germans, and the farm labourer said, oh well, they must have been the men that Mary Gorman spotted this morning. So this was confirmation 3 men had been there. Now she herself didn't report that. And then at this stage, the boat was pulled up onto the beach. It was spotted by a local man, by John McCarthy, and of course when he went to examine the boat, there were guns and there was all sorts of very suspicious looking things. He got a neighbour to go and report this to the RIC barracks in Ardfert. Because of what had been found on the boat, the place was suddenly now swarming with policemen searching, and they could, there was 3 sets of footprints from the boat and all the rest of it. So the search was on for these strange men that had appeared.
They walked across country for about 3 miles, but all the time Monteith was on the lookout for some place to hide Casement, because the man was very ill and couldn't keep walking until they got to Tralee. Eventually Monteith spotted the old fort in McKenna's land, and they walked in there and took Casement in with them. They sat down, took a rest, had a mini council of war before they said goodbye to Casement, and continued, the 2 then, Monteith and Bailey, continued on their journey into Tralee town. Constable Riley arrived at the fort and saw the stranger. Straight away he raised his carbine and demanded to know who he was. Casement pleaded with him to lower the weapon, that he was unarmed, that he wasn't, the constable wasn't in any danger from him. Constable Riley asked Casement for his name, and Casement gave a false name, that of Richard Morton. Riley then blew his whistle to draw the attention of Sergeant Hearn, who was searching with him in the area. As Roger Casement was being brought out of the fort, he was very conscious of the German code that he had in one of his pockets. He came to have that code because he swapped overcoats with Monteith earlier in the journey that morning. His overcoat was too heavy, he was ill, suffering from the after effects of malaria, and Monteith decided to give him his lighter overcoat and take Casement's heavier one. But Casement, as I said, saw the poignant trap, realised what he was going to be taking, and up to then he was very conscious of the German code in his pocket. He didn't realise it was going to be incriminating. He took it out of one of his pockets with one of his hands, put it behind his back, tore it in 2 or 4 pieces and let it fall to the ground. In the meantime, young Dowling, who was a friend of Martin Collins, saw the bits of paper on the side of the road, ran over, picked them up and gave them to Martin Collins, who in turn gave them to one of the policemen. That was the German code that Monteith had been given in Berlin before he left Germany, which was to be used for further supplies for the volunteers, on the assumption that the 1916 rising was going to be widespread and was going to go ahead.
So Casement was arrested, brought to the barracks in Ardfert, and then transferred onwards to Tralee. And then Casement the next morning was marched up to the train station in the middle of a bodyguard of armed police officers.
And we know from history and Casement's trial in London, where some local people here from Carahan and Banna were subpoenaed and summoned to London for the trial. They were questioned and abused in the trial for one very simple reason. The the British wanted Casement tried for treason, and the most important part about it is treason has to be within the realm of the Crown. His work in Germany, in other words, getting the arms, was outside the realm, where the British knew if they could prove his actions here by organising guns, it was within the realm, because Ireland at the time was occupied. It was a dominion of the UK. So that was a crucial part of the legal process, and that is why the English government needed that conformity of a case, that the local people were then indicated, and it is the London media elaborating it and contrived to say the local people informed and betrayed Casement, which is not the real story. That is fabricated lies.
The witnesses from Ardfert were, just pawns in all of this. They were, and like when you take their evidence piece by piece, you think it's not really that significant. Like literally Mary Gorman was brought over to London to be asked, did you see this man in the early hours of Good Friday morning? Yes, I saw him. He was wearing a long overcoat. And you see, the significance of the long overcoat was a German rail ticket had been found in the pocket of the overcoat. So what the Crown case was trying to do was stitch Casement at every single point, to this charge of treason.
The witnesses from this area who were taken over against their will over to London for the trial of Casement, like that they were completely innocent people, and they got blamed. This area got blamed, and sometimes they called Ardfert the Casement hangers. It even happened in Tralee, when Ardfert won the championship, a team called Tubber in 1917. And I think that even at that match they were called Casement hangers, and it was very wrong altogether.
The village of Ardfert suffered terribly because it got a bad name. People said Ardfert were responsible for the arrest of Roger Casement and ultimately his execution, which of course we now know was far from the truth. Very few people knew that Roger Casement was actually even coming to Banna Strand. Apart from Austin Stack and a few other senior members of the Rising at the time, nobody knew he was coming to Banna Strand.
The families of those four witnesses from Ardfert, they were, made to feel shame about what they had done. Unfairly, I think very unfairly, they were made to feel that that they had done something wrong. And I think if anyone puts themselves back in their position and says you could have done differently, I think what happened to them was a situation not of their own making. They just happened to see just this strange man who had wandered into their lives, almost randomly, completely, for two of them anyway, changed the course of their life,
The people of Ardfert always felt very bad about how they were treated by the media during the trial and after it. Both the Ardfert witnesses and the Ardfert people in general felt they were blamed because their evidence was supposed to have led to Casement's conviction and execution. And nothing could be further from the truth. Nobody knew Roger Casement was coming to Ardfert. Nobody knew who he was, and there were no plans prepared to meet him. When he was arrested in McKenna's Fort and questioned about his name, and the same in the RIC barrack in Ardfert and in the RIC barrack in Tralee, each time he gave his name as Richard Martin from Buckinghamshire in England. The people of Ardfert have nothing to be ashamed of, and it took over 100 years, and it's about time that that wrong was righted.
The New York Times, interestingly, was very critical of Roger Casement. Now, their news coverage was fairly straight, and at the end there was a very long Sunday magazine piece, and its title was Roger Casement Martyr. So that public opinion reflected how journalists changed and how views changed during this period. And as as his trial took place, and then the appeal, and all of that working itself out, you saw Irish America really take to his side. And there were huge meetings in America supporting him, trying to do whatever they could to see that he would get leniency or clemency.
Before Casement remains were returned to Ireland, a lot of work was done by Dr. Herbert Mackey. He set up a committee called the Casement Vindication Committee, in which he received widespread publicity both at home and abroad to clear Casement's reputation and to have his remains returned, as was his last wish, from his grave in Pentonville prison. Casement never wanted to be left in Pentonville. He pleaded with his first cousin, Gertrude Bannister, "Don't let me lie in this horrible place, bring me back with you to Ireland."
When Casement was hanged in Pentonville and buried, with the execution of a prisoner at the time, it was at the discretion of the prison governor whether the executed man would be given a coffin. Except in this case, the word came down to the governor of Pentonville Prison from the Home Office, he's not getting a coffin. So he was buried in a shroud, you know, in the grave. And this is, you know, for Irish people who are very, you know, the Irish way of death and funerals is so different from the English way that this, I think, you know, was really what disturbed people and disturbed De Valera as well, the idea that he was coffinless in the ground. And but the interesting thing is then that in '65, when his remains were exhumed, the British government offered to pay for the coffin, and the Irish government accepted, you know, which I thought was, you know, that's only as it should be.
On 1st of March 1965, the state funeral took place. His remains were brought into Dublin Airport on the 23rd of February 1965, and he got a state funeral, as I said, to Glasnevin Cemetery on the 1st of March. President Eamon de Valera delivered the oration, and one of the great things he said there was that if there never had been a 1916 rising, Casement's reputation would be worldwide. The first sod on the site of the Banna Strand Memorial was turned by Mrs. Florence Monteith Lynch. The oration that day was delivered by Dr. Mackey. Unfortunately, he died suddenly some weeks later, and when the memorial was unveiled on the 28th of July 1968, it was Dr. Mackey's son, Jim Mackey, who delivered the oration. And it was the first attempt ever to mark Banna Strand for what it was, a great part of Irish history, the inaugural part of the 1916 rising, and made sure that the great man, Roger Casement, would never be forgotten while that memorial stands there as a tribute to him, and to his memory, and to his comrades.
I remember the day that this monument was unveiled here. It was the 21st of April 1991, on the 75th anniversary of the capture of Roger Casement here in McInnes Fort. It was unveiled by Eileen Neal Talbolt, and it was a very historical day for here in McInnes Fort. On the day, Sean Joseph O'Connor spoke, was one of the main men behind getting this up here, and he also was involved in the Banna Corrahan Casement's monument. So he had been involved with Casement for 50 years or more. It is very important to have this monument here on behalf of the people of Fett Parish and surrounding areas, and people be able to come and visit and see where Roger Casement was arrested on the 21st of April 1916.
The reason the bus is here today is that Effort Development Association in 2015 got together and decided it was important that we should mark the centenary of Roger Casement's landing in Banna Beach and his association with Effort. So the Development Association fundraised, and we were also lucky enough to get some allocation from the various county councillors, and in turn then we had enough money to make this possible. Joe Neeson sculpted the piece, which we were absolutely thrilled with and delighted with, because it's an incredible likeness to Roger Casement. And on the 21st of April 2016 we were honoured to have the President of Ireland, Michael D. Higgins, come to our village and unveil the monument to Roger Casement. It was an incredible event, and probably one of the proudest moments of my life to be being associated with, and it was a great pleasure to welcome the President of Ireland to our village.
I think Roger Casement, was remembered as a great man in every way, and I think as time goes on, his importance will be seen as more and more. Like he was a man well before his time. He was a man that was very intelligent, highly educated, and he was motivated to go to the world where people were being wronged, and he will be always a man that Ireland can be proud of. He will be always a man that his name will always stand up to the test of time.
Casement will always be remembered as a person that fought for justice, but his legacy will last, because I think William Butler Yeats put it very well on a poem he wrote about Casement. Casement is knocking at the door, and he is still knocking at the door, and knocking that we would have a free society, our capacity to govern ourselves and treat people in a humane and just way.
Roger Casement will go down in history as one of the greatest Irishmen of all time. He was also one of the world's greatest humanitarians. He devoted his time and his efforts and his money every way he could to help the people of Ireland. He was well remembered in Arfert, and he will be remembered for all time, not alone in Arfert, but nationally and internationally, as one of Ireland's greatest heroes.
The wild waves roll in peace again on the lonely Banna Strand. Oh, the wild waves roll in peace again on the lonely Banna Strand.